Sup guys? This is an in-depth guide on Battleship guns. My hope is that this video will be able to take a complete beginner and make them an expert by the end of this video. There will be a lot of information packed into it, so depending on how much you already know, you might have to watch it more than once to be able to fully absorb all of the information. I'll add timestamps, so feel free to skip to a part you want to learn about if there's stuff you already know. Before I begin though, I am going to talk about armor types in this video, assuming you already know how to determine the armor type of the enemy you're up against. If you don't know what armor types are, or how to find them, watch the video linked in the description before this one, or you won't be able to understand half the things I say. Okay, starting off, for a complete beginner, I'm going to quickly show what a battleship gun does. As the name suggests, they are the primary weapons of battleships, but can also be equipped on battlecruisers, which are functionally the same as battleships. Monitors, which are like baby battleships. And aviation battleships, which are battleships with a plane slot instead of a secondary gun. This is a top-tier gun known as the Triple 406 Mark VI, or more commonly, just Mark VI. The ship I'm equipping it on is Champagne. I know it's purple, but as you learn more about equipment, you'll come to understand that the rarity is not everything. Now I will show you what it looks like when I fire the gun in battle. As you can see, when Champagne fires the gun, 3 red shells come flying out. The number of shells matches the number of barrels on the gun, as well as the triple part of the name. Champagne only has one main gun mount, so she fires the gun once. This is John Bart, a battleship with 2 main gun mounts. Here's what happens when she fires the gun. As you can see, after the initial volley, there is a second one that is fired automatically. Naturally, the more mounts the better, since more shots means more damage. Battleships with fewer main gun mounts usually have something to compensate for it, such as increased damage or reduced cooldowns, but generally they do not outweigh the benefit of just having more gun mounts. This is Flandre, a battleship with 3 main gun mounts. Most of the battleships actually have 3 mounts once limit broken. A few only have 2, and Champagne is the only one which remains with 1 even once fully limit broken. I will also introduce some important terminology. A volley refers to a single shot of the gun, and a salvo refers to the entire round. For example, we're firing 3 volleys per salvo for Flandre, who has 3 main gun mounts. You can see how many main gun mounts each ship has on their wiki page, right here beside their main gun efficiency. You can also see at which limit break they gain extra gun mounts, which typically results in the biggest increase in damage from limit breaking. Aside from dealing damage, many battleships also have skills which trigger when firing their guns. For example, here's Alsace with the Mark VI. As you can see, when she fires her gun, there are these extra whitish blue shells that look different from the 406 Mark VI's shells, and this is called a barrage. For ships that have a particularly powerful barrage, it can be a good idea to use a faster gun with lower damage just to trigger their barrage more often, but more on that later. I also want to briefly show you how the damage of guns are calculated. This part isn't really important at all, but I just want to show people who are curious what every number like firepower, efficiency, and so on do. You can just skip this section if you're not interested. I'm just going to do a quick calculation for Flandre's damage with the 406 Mark VI. Weapon base damage is self-explanatory. Weapon coefficiency is hidden in game and you have to get it from the wiki. For the 406 Mark VI, it is 105%. Slot efficiency is its number here, and for Flandre it's 145%, hence 1.45. Weapon stat multiplier is how firepower is used in the calculation. In short, take the total firepower of the ship from base stats, equipment, fleet tech, cats, buffs, and then add 100 to it, then divide that sum by 100 to get the multiplier given by the firepower stat. Weapon armor modifier is the modifier of the weapon's ammo. 406 Mark VI is an HE weapon, which stands for high explosives. Battleship HE ammo is the most powerful against light armor, while retaining decent damage against medium and heavy, and can also set enemies on fire. But that aside for now, as you can see, the Mark VI has modifiers of 140%, 110%, and 90% against light, medium, and heavy armors, and since we're against a heavy armor enemy, we need to use the 90% multiplier. Next is total DRB, which refers to flat damage bonuses, such as Tirpitz's self-buff, as well as ammo buff. Flandre doesn't have any damage buffs at the start of the battle, so we can skip that. The same thing applies for injure ratio, DRT, and hunter. What each of these values means is all included in the sections above this in the damage calculations page, which will be linked in the description if you want to learn more about them. Next, level advantage is 2% per level, capping at 50%. Threat level damage modifier is something which only exists in campaign stages, so we can ignore that here. Manual modifier is 20% for the first volley if you manually aim it. I will show the difference between auto and manual damage, so let's calculate both. And finally, the base critical modifier is 150% if the attack crits, which can be further increased by equipment and buffs. Okay, pressing enter, we get around 2355 damage, a little higher if we roll the 1 or 2 in the random parts. With a 20% manual bonus, we get around 2828. As you can see, the damage in game is spot on with the calculation. So that's briefly everything that goes into the computation for the final damage dealt. Once again, you can read it in more detail on the damage calculations page of the wiki. Now, let's finally get to the battleship guns themselves. This is a page on the wiki called the List of Battleship Guns, and it's a very useful resource to make head-to-head comparisons between different guns. Starting with the ammo types. It's actually a lot more simple than it looks on this table. The major ammo types are normal, HE, which I mentioned earlier stands for high explosive, AP, which stands for armor piercing, and SAP, which stands for semi-AP. There are a bunch of different APs like AP MKD, AP asterisk, AP4, and so on, but in game they're all just called AP. The wiki makes the distinctions because their modifiers have different values, but just forget the names and pay attention to their modifiers. There's also Type 3 shell, which is a special ammo that only one gun in the game has. Here is the gun in action. As you can see, once the shell splits into a million pieces, most of them hit absolutely nothing. It is a meme gun that nobody has ever seriously considered using for as long as it's been in the game, so you can completely ignore it. Back to the table, you can see that HE ammo has the highest modifiers against light armor, SAP against medium with some forms of AP not far behind, and AP against heavy. Aside from their differing armor mods, some ammo types have special properties. Normal ammo for battleships just sucks. HE ammo has a high chance to start a powerful burn, which is a damage over time effect when they hit an enemy. AP ammo has a chance to inflict an armor break debuff, but only against heavy armor enemies. It is also listed on the page here, where the armor break is an 8% increase in shelling damage taken. Now, let's take a look at the guns. In this table here, you can sort the guns by many different metrics. The most useful ones are reload and DPS. I'll be looking at the plus 10 damage under the max rarity tab. Max enhanced has the guns at plus 13. The light, medium, and heavy DPS columns take into account the base damage, coefficient, reload, volley time, absolute cooldown, and armor mods of the weapon, so it does a lot of the work for you. However, DPS is far from the only relevant metric. Also, I've explained it in my What does upgrading past +10 do video, but just as a quick reminder, the coefficient is simply a multiplier on the gun's damage. I don't really know why they separated it from the base damage instead of just increasing the base damage by 5%. Anyways, just as a starting place, DPS is great and much better than choosing a gun at random. First, let's go over the best guns against light armor enemies. Like I said before, you can completely ignore the confetti gun, so the best gun sorting by DPS is the Rainbow 406 Mark 7 from the New Jersey event. Depending on when this video goes up, either you will soon be able to craft it from the Gear Lab, which I recommend doing so if you don't have at least 2 already, or you can already craft it. It also happens to be the best gun against light armor in most situations, having not only higher damage than other guns, but also higher firepower, further increasing all firepower scaling damage. It has a base cooldown of 24.22 seconds, which after accounting for realistic reload stats, lands around the 20-second mark, making it line up with 20-second buffs and airstrikes easily. Next gun on the list sorted by DPS is the 406 Mark 6 prototype from PR6. While its base damage is slightly lower than the Mark 7, it has a coefficient of 125%, meaning that if you compare one volley from the Proto Mark 6 to the Mark 7, the Proto Mark 6 will deal more damage. However, it has a much longer cooldown, meaning that in most cases you will get an extra shot off with the Mark 7 over the Mark 6, so you should only use Mark 6 if you really know what you're doing. For instance, if you're doing a battle that ends at exactly 35 seconds, you would only get off one shot with both the Mark 7 and the prototype Mark 6, so there's a good chance that the Mark 6 will deal more total damage. Regardless, it is very low priority and a gun that you can ignore until you know exactly why you want to use it. Next up on the list is the 406 Mark 6, which is a weaker but much more accessible version of the Mark 7. New players can easily get these from purple and gold Eagle Union equipment boxes. Until you get the Rainbow Mark 7, the 406 Mark 6 will be the best gun against light armor enemies, and is strong enough for most of the game. If you're a new player, try to get your hands on a couple of these and you will be covered for light armor until you're able to upgrade to Mark 7s. This next gun, the old Demi Cannon, is not a battleship gun, but a pirate ship gun that is only equipable on San Martino, so we can skip that. Next, we get to the Triple 381. As you can see, despite being gold rarity, the Triple 381 is weaker than the 406 Mark 6, but it is a bit faster, so it can be used for timing purposes. Or in other words, if you want to make sure one battleship goes before another, you can put the Triple 381 on the one that goes first, and 406 Mark 6 on the one that goes after. While the Triple 381 can be upgraded to +13 because it is SSR, which is stronger than the Mark 6 at +11, it is not recommended to do so because it is barely stronger at +13, and quite a lot weaker than the endgame option Mark 7. You should probably not spend limited gold plates on intermediary equipment. To this day, I don't have a single Triple 381 at +13. Guns that have a base cooldown of around 24 seconds end up having cooldowns of around 20 seconds when taking real reload stats into account, so you may hear me referring to these types of guns as 20-second guns or damage guns. Guns with around 20 seconds cooldowns are crucial in maximizing damage of certain boxing fleets, as they line up with many powerful buffs and debuff effects, like Helena's Radar Scan and Implacable's Root, which tends to have a cooldown of around 20 seconds. After the Triple 381, we see a significant jump down in the cooldowns of the next few guns. I'll be ignoring the Quadruple 380 because it is only used on John Bart and otherwise useless. So, the Triple 380, Twin 406 SKC, and the Triple 305 are sometimes known as fast guns because they're noticeably faster than the regular 20-second guns. With real reload stats, their cooldowns get under 17 seconds. There are minor cooldown and damage differences between the three, but in practice it makes little difference which one you use. They are often used in mobbing fights on ships that have powerful barrages tied to activation, for example Musashi, Soyuz, Hood, and so on. My personal preference is the Twin 406, because burns started by HE ammo scale off the base damage of the gun. Since it fires 2 shells with higher base damage on each, the burns started by this gun are stronger than the other 2. I believe it is also slightly easier to obtain. Next up are the 2 purple guns. The Kai is the upgraded version of the base twin 410 here. Notice how little of a difference there is between the twin 410 Kai and the gold guns I just talked about. In base damage, it actually beats out the twin 406, although it loses in final damage because it provides only 25 FP. Cooldown wise, it is slower, but barely. New players can easily get the regular version from gold boxes or certain campaign and event stages. To upgrade it via the Gear Lab, you must obtain some materials from Operation Siren, but the materials are not rare or limited at all. Keep in mind that Musashi wants an RGN main gun, and this is the best available option for HE ammo as well as low cooldown, so it is the preferred option on her even in chapters 14 and 15. It is not only a great piece of intermediate equipment, but has endgame relevance as well. Finally, there is also the Twin 381, which is faster than the guns above it, but its damage is also noticeably lower. I don't think the cooldown makes up for its lower damage, but it's not a totally useless piece of equipment if you have one lying around for some reason. Past that, there are no more HE guns worth mentioning. Before moving on to AP guns, there is something else you should know about HE guns. Their modifiers, although falling off past light armor compared to AP, are still quite decent against medium and heavy. Comparing its weakest mod of 90% against heavy to the weakest mod of AP guns against light armor, which tend to hover between 40 to 50%, you can probably guess that you're better off using HE than AP if you're against a mix of all 3 armor types, and you would be correct. Additionally, before chapter 13 in campaign, you pretty much won't see any heavy armor enemies, so while progressing in campaign, you don't have to consider AP weapons at all until reaching chapter 13, or against Operation Siren bosses. Since HE guns still do okay against medium and heavy armor, it's not necessary to switch them out until you start running into walls that you can't overcome, perhaps against a heavy armor Operation Siren boss or the 13-4 Taiho boss. With that being said, let's move on to AP guns. Although I did just say HE is better when you're against a mix of different armor types, when you reach endgame, you're going to be fighting mostly medium and heavy armor bosses, where AP guns completely take over. Between medium and heavy armor, I prefer using battleships against medium because their guns are stronger against medium, while many carrier equipments deal more damage against heavy than medium, so I will talk about the guns sorted by their medium DPS, but talk about their heavy performance as well. First up is the 460, aka the Yamato gun. It has the exact same issues as the Proto 406 Mark VI HE gun. Despite its incredibly high base damage, it is simply too slow and will usually fire 1 less salvo than faster guns, resulting in less damage dealt. Therefore, it is not a gun I would recommend outside of some niche scenarios. The first situation where it can be good is on Musashi against the heavy armor boss, since it is one of 2 viable AP IJN guns. Its heavy modifier is also higher relative to other AP guns compared to its medium modifier. The second situation where it can be useful is if you're purposely sinking some kind of effect that is tied to your battleship's main gun, such as Bismarck Sway's Black Hole, with slow airstrikes from ships like Shinano and Haku. Outside of those 2 situations, this gun doesn't really see much use, so if you don't have it, you probably won't have Musashi either, and you won't be missing out on much at all. Moving on, I want to first cover the Twin 457 Mark A. Its specs are incredibly high, having top of the line DPS, the highest amount of firepower similar to the other Rainbow guns, and very good ballistics. Despite having very high damage, its reload is also significantly faster than that of 20-second guns, putting it closer to 17 seconds with realistic reload stats, and putting it in a similar category to the HE Twin 406, which I just talked about. At a glance, it may seem like the best AP gun overall, however, the faster reload may actually be a detriment in many cases. First off, it's very difficult to sync this gun with other guns, so if you're fighting a boss where you want all your battleships to fire in quick succession, you would need to obtain 3 copies of this gun. However, if you use this gun, your battleship's cooldowns will be too fast to take advantage of 20-second buffs like Helena's radar scan or Implacable's root. Therefore, this gun is only noticeably better than 20-second guns when you don't need to worry about syncing, and perhaps also want its lower cooldown to spam barrages. I find myself using it mostly in chapters 14 and 15, and usually just one, but sometimes up to two of them across my two fleets. Obtaining just one of these from Protocore Exchange will be a big upgrade to your arsenal, but there is no need to get two or even three of them via Gear Lab or Research until you have enough of other more important equipment. Next up are all these guns that have around 20 seconds base cooldown. The most important one of the bunch is the triple 406 MLE, aka the Champagne Gun or Champ Gun. While it may seem like there are three guns that are stronger than it against medium armor, when accounting for its better ballistics, its difference against medium armor compared to the guns above it is very minor, while providing top tier anti-heavy damage as well. Therefore, it is the best 20-second AP gun for rounding out your battleships, with HE ammo against light armor. This Russian triple 406 is the strongest 20-second gun against medium armor, but it is currently event limited, only obtainable from the Soyuz event, and you can only have one at most. It is not worth upgrading until you have upgraded at least two Champagne guns, as its damage against heavy is not great compared to the Champagne gun due to its lower modifier. This triple 406 is known as the Italian 406, or SAP gun, similar to the Russian triple 406. And similar to the Russian triple 406, it is only really great against medium armor, so again, it is not quite worth upgrading until you've made your Champagne guns. The triple 380 MLE is very similar to the Champ gun, trading a tiny bit of damage for a slightly faster cooldown. Although it is higher by DPS, it is weaker on a per salvo basis, and only if that less than 1 second cooldown can net you an extra salvo is it better than the Champagne gun, so it is almost always inferior to the triple 406 MLE. It is kind of similar to the HE triple 381 compared to the 406 Mark 6. After that, there is also the IJN triple 410, which by all metrics is vastly inferior to the triple 406 MLE, but since it is an IJN gun, it is the only viable option at 20 seconds for Musashi, so it is worth a mention. Personally, I have one at plus 13 for Musashi, but I would not go for it until having two Champagne guns fully upgraded. And honestly, even at that point, it's probably a better idea to upgrade a third Champ gun to plus 13 over this. The Twin 406 Mark IV is also a decently strong gun, which upgrades into the Twin 457, having decent damage and very low cooldown. However, it comes with a skill which makes it kind of useless from the 5th shot onward, although battles will rarely ever reach that point. I personally have never used it, as I deemed it to not be worth the amount of electronics which it costs to craft, but if you plan on crafting a 457 from the Gear Lab, then it could be a viable placeholder. Once again, it is also not a 20-second gun, so its use cases would be the same as the Twin 457. And that about wraps up all the important battleship guns in the game. Personally, I would recommend sticking to the triple 406 Mark 6 and the Twin 410 on your battleships until you start getting Champagne guns, and only then switching over to AP against the appropriate armor types. Both of these purple HE guns are available early on, and are very close in performance relative to their gold and even rainbow counterparts. There aren't any great purple options for AP, however, and remember that HE is not terrible against medium and heavy armor, whereas AP is terrible against light. Now I will explain what each of the columns mean on this table aside from the obvious ones and ones I've already explained. Many of these are related to physical properties of how the shells travel and land, some of which have significant impact on the performance of guns past their raw damage. The round column is pretty simple, meaning the gun fires X amount of shells once per volley. Volley time refers to how long the gun takes to fire all its shells in a single volley. Most battleship guns fire all 3 shells simultaneously, so their volley times are 0, but there are exceptions. This is the Jean Bart gun, the quadruple 380, which has a volley time of 0.15 seconds. Its round stat says 2x2, meaning per volley, it first shoots 2 shells, and then after a 0.15 second delay, fires the next 2 shells. Here is what it looks like in game. Notice that on the first volley of a salvo, the game time freezes, so the delay is exaggerated. while the two parts of the second volley are closer together. After the volley time, we have the range of the gun, which is an irrelevant stat for battleship guns because all enemies are pretty much always in range. Angle and attribute are also irrelevant because they're the same for all battleship guns. All that is left is the spread, which is a very important stat in determining how likely a shell is to land on an enemy. In order to talk about the spread though, we also need to talk about the splash. Also, just a quick disclaimer, this is how I understand the spread and splash to work, and there are certain things which I'm unsure about. If I make any mistakes here, feel free to correct me in the comments. The splash refers to the area which a shell could fall on, around the area at which it is aimed. Let's take a large enemy, which has a hitbox of 5.5 by 10 units. Let's use the Mark 7 specs as an example. So, around the center of the spread, there is a 19 by 19 square that the shell could land on. Let's say that the shell lands on the very corner here. The shells of the Mark 7 have a splash of 15 units, which is the diameter of the AOE of the shell. Between the edge of the splash and the corner of the hitbox, there is a small distance of 0.53 units, at least according to the latest version of ChatGPT, meaning that the Mark 7 does have a chance to miss even against a completely stationary target. However, as soon as you introduce any kind of spread reduction, whether it be from the innate buff skill like New Jersey's, Vanguard's flagship buff, or the Admiralty Fire Control Depot just to name a few, the possibility of missing goes away. Now, if we look at the Champ gun, which has the same splash but one less spread compared to the Mark 7, it does not miss against stationary targets even without the help of spread reduction. The 457 is even more accurate, having both lower spread and higher splash. In general, twin guns tend to be more accurate than triple guns. Looking back at the fast HE guns, we can see that the twin 406 is much more accurate than the triple guns, but having higher spread means that the triple guns have a better chance at hitting multiple enemies. On the other end of the spectrum, we can see that the SAP gun has 20 spread, even higher than that of the Mark 7, meaning that despite it being stronger on paper than the Champ gun, it is barely stronger in practice since it has the potential to miss. However, as soon as you introduce some kind of way to reduce its spread, it definitely becomes stronger against medium armor, whereas further reduction won't help the Champ gun, which already has a hit rate of 100% against stationary targets. One important thing to keep in mind is that the center of the spread might not necessarily be the exact center of the enemy hitbox due to how the game is coded, although I'm unsure of where exactly it is. On this wiki page where Ricist calculates the hit rate of plane bombs based on spread and splash, it is assumed that the center of the spread area is 5 units to the left of the center of the hitbox. However, I cannot either confirm or deny that. I have empirically tested the hit rates of a few dive bombers to be within 1 to 2% of the computed hit rates, so it should be close. There is also no guarantee that battleship guns have the same aiming behavior as bombs. In the end, all I can guarantee is that, from my personal experience, spread and splash do make a tangible difference in gun performance, where champagne guns ballistics is around the cutoff of when a gun is accurate enough. If you're using something like the Mark 7 or the SAP gun, the spread reduction stat will make a noticeable difference in damage output. I hope you can understand now why the champagne gun is a great choice, having top-of-the-line damage against medium and heavy armor with good accuracy out of the box. Finally, the speed is somewhat relevant as well. The higher the speed of the shelling, the less time the enemy has to move out of the way before the shells reach them, slightly increasing hit rate. The difference between the 100 speed of HE shells compared to the 140 speed of the champagne gun shells is super noticeable against moving enemies, which results in better relative performance for guns with faster shells against moving targets. And with that, I think I should have covered everything you need to know about battleship guns. Obviously, time exists, and this guide won't cover specifically every single gun that comes out from this point on until the end of time, but if you understand all the concepts I talk about in the video, you should be able to evaluate future guns yourself based on their stats. If there's anything I'm missing, feel free to leave a comment with your question, and if it is something that isn't already answered in the video, me or perhaps another commenter will respond to your question. The next video will probably be a similar breakdown on planes, Probably just one of the 3 types to start. I hope you were able to learn something from this video, and if you want to support the channel, feel free to leave a donation in the Ko-fi page linked in the description. Thank you for watching, and see you in the next one.